before all of this, you mentioned your Hollywood years, and the first book came out in '96, and you've said very publicly that you went back to the literary world to write bigger than you were allowed to write in film and television. So how surprised were you that you were even approached for an adaptation of something you had written specifically not for film and television?
Well, I began to be approached around the time Clash of Kings came out, and even more when Storm of Swords came out. Those were the first two books to actually hit the bestseller lists. Game of Thrones did okay, but it didn't hit any list. But the series built.
Imagine?
So Clash of Kings, hit the New York Times list at like number 13 for 1 week, and Storm of Swords was a little higher on the list and lasted a few more weeks. And at that point, I started getting these inquiries from Hollywood, and I thought at the time, well, these guys don't know what they're talking about here. They don't know that it's impossible to do. And some of them indeed didn't. They were just looking at the list. The Lord of the Rings movies were making an obscene amount of money and were gigantic hits. So Hollywood is basically imitative. So at the time that the Lord of the Rings movies were setting these box office records, a lot of the studios and producers were looking around saying, well, what other fantasies are out there that we can buy? And they all started buying fantasies. And, we've seen a few of them. I mean, Narnia subsequently made it to the screen. Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, the first book, made it to the screen. And they came looking for mine. But I took a few meetings. I'm always willing to take a meeting. I got some free lunches out of it. And they would present their ideas to me of how they would adapt these into movies. But to adapt them into movies, to get, and they weren't even talking about one book, they were talking about the entire series. They wanted to know how it ended so they could figure out how to wrap it up, and they would say things like, well, it's really the story of Daenerys, so we'll eliminate these other characters, we'll just focus on Daenerys, or on Jon Snow, or on Ned in some cases, and
like, do you know what happens to Ned?
Yeah. Well, we'll have to change that part. So I listened and I ate the free lunches, but I didn't buy for any of those. But it did get me thinking that the only way to do this was not for the feature films, much as I would have liked to have a $200 million budget. I thought it was better to tell the entire story with all of the characters and all the complexity, and the only way to do that is television. And not any television either, because you can't, there's too much graphic sex and graphic violence and too much complexity for network television. The networks would be too leery of it. They would water it down too much. So it had to be premium cable, and HBO, of course, is the Tiffany's of that, doing more shows and better shows. And of course, I've been a huge HBO fan for ages. I've had HBO for, God, I don't even want to think how long, but shows like Deadwood and Rome in particular showed me that they were the people who could really, really do this. And then when I met David Benioff and Dan Weiss, and they had the same idea, and that was a match made in heaven.
I know you had really specific casting for two of the characters. I'm sure the audience would love to hear which two you knew who you wanted to play. And but if you could expand a little bit on that, George, on how it feels to you to see all of the other characters become three-dimensional with the actors who are now embodying them. Casting process.
Well, it's pretty amazing. I mean, way back in 1996 when the first book came out, occasionally people would say, well, if it was made in a movie, who would you like to see play the role? And I would say, well, it can't be made into a movie, so I really don't have to wonder about that. But the question would nonetheless get me thinking. And I had like a dream casting in 1996. But unfortunately, many of those people from 1996 got older in the interim, instead of saying as exactly as I remembered them from 96. And by the time we actually went into production on this, they were too old to play the roles. So, but when David and Dan sat down, there were two roles. We knew that Sean Bean would be perfect for Ned Stark, and he was great. And for Tyrion, Peter Dinklage. You know, that was the one role where we didn't audition anybody, we didn't read anybody. There are no tapes of other people reading Tyrion's roles that will ever surface anywhere because we made no auditions. We just said we got to get Peter Dinklage, and we went out and made an offer to Peter Dinklage, and we persuaded him to take the role, and that's worked out well. With Sean Bean, we did audition some other people just in case we couldn't get, but thankfully we were able to get Sean. The other roles, that was trickier. That was more ambitious. We had to read a lot of different people. You know, search all over the world. I mean, you know, our show was shot primarily in Northern Ireland and Belfast, so we did a lot of British actors and Irish actors. We did auditions in Belfast, in Dublin, and many auditions in London. But we also did auditions in New York City, in Los Angeles, even in Australia for a few of the parts. And we have truly a global cast, talented actors from all over the world on this.
Yeah, definitely.
Not sure if we have any Canadians, though, come to think. Do we have any Canadians?
My goodness, we're everywhere else. Now, a little surprise for you. Speaking of international, I was recently in London, and I had a chance to talk to some of the actors, and I couldn't resist the opportunity to ask them if there was a character in this series, in Game of Thrones, that reminds them of you.
Oh, dear.
So, I hope you like this. Take a look.
Yes, there is, but I'm not going to say.
Didn't George once say that he felt he was Tyrion?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I definitely would see that. Definitely would see that.
Tyrion is obviously his favourite, right?
I mean, it's an incredible character. Incredible character. And yeah, as George is, so that would make complete sense.
No.
A hint?
Well, he's got little sparrows all over the place.
Really, the eunuch?
Varys? Yes. Do you not think so?
Samuel.
Because he's knowledgeable, and when you ask George about what's happening, he always gives you a riddle. He doesn't give you the full answer, and I think Varys is like that.
He has that innocent perspective of the world, and it's all a piece in his mind, and he's very good-hearted.
But I know he has a soft spot for Davos.
I think he's written them. They're all part of him, I guess.
Can you say that on film?
Well, that was fun to do. So.
They're all part right.
I was going to say, who's right?
No, they're all part. Well, Tyrion is my favorite. There's no doubt about that. You know, he's the easiest to write. At least for the first 3 books, he was the easiest to write. He got harder to write with book 5 in particular because he's in a very dark place right there. And but he's witty and he's intelligent. And Tyrion is almost like what I wish I could be because I'm not as witty as Tyrion. Well, I am as witty as Tyrion because I invent all of the witty things that Tyrion says. The problem is, of course, that Tyrion tosses off these witty lines with ease in a moment of conversation. And I, of course, in real life, think of the witty thing to say a week after the conversation has ended. Oh, God damn it, that's what I should have said. That would have been really funny and cutting and things like that.
Yeah.
So I don't think of these things as fast. But Sam, yeah, is there's a lot of me in Sam, too.
That's, of course, Nikolai Coster-Waldau, who plays Jaime Lannister.
Yeah.
Girls are screaming for that one.
But, you know, there's all of the viewpoint characters, I have to put something of myself into to make them come alive. And even the ones that are, you know, very unlike me on the surface, like, you know, 11-year-old girls. You know, I've obviously never been an 11-year-old girl. I have known an occasional 11-year-old girl, especially when I was an 11-year-old boy. Although, actually, when I was an 11-year-old boy, I was too scared to talk to 11-year-old girls, so I was more like Sam in that regard.
It's interesting because Elio, who George mentioned earlier, and you know, created Westeros.org, I met him in London, and we were talking about how we both thought that Tyrion was your favorite, and that was, and what we were musing about. Is that a good thing for Tyrion? Because you put this guy through hell and back again. So does it benefit Tyrion that he is your favorite?
No,
or?
probably not. It doesn't help him at all.
It does not help him.
And really, in Dance with Dragons, he goes through the most hellish stuff yet. So you know, he's at a nadir there. So you try not to play favorites, I suppose. And
Maybe you put your favorite through the worst.
But I put all the characters through horrible things. You know, that's. I get letters from fans that are saying, "Well, why do you hate the Starks so much? Why do you put them so through many horrible things?" But you know, the Lannisters have been through some pretty horrible things too lately, and you know, the Baratheons have gone through an awful lot of horrible stuff.
It's been bad for them.
The Targaryens are practically all wiped out except for Dany. Yeah. You know, so
Everybody
you know,
has their comeuppance.
Everybody, you know, it's the Middle Ages, and it's hard. Life is hard and nasty and short and brutal, and
You never know.
that's the way it is. But it's fun to read about, I hope.
Yes. What's your routine for watching the show? Do you get advanced copies and sit and watch them by yourself? Do you watch them at Sunday at 9 o'clock on HBO and HBO Canada, like the rest of us? Do you have screening parties? What's your routine for watching Game of Thrones?
Well, you know, it depends on where we are because we do travel a lot. During the first season, I had to make a trip to New York to actually attend that Time 100 gala where you're talking about, where I was one of the 100 most influential people in the world. But I was not so influential that I could get HBO to send me an advanced screener of that week's episode. So I didn't want to just watch it on the hotel, you know, HBO set up. So we actually found a bar in New York City that does Game of Thrones night every Sunday night, and we went there. And
Look at everybody's like, oh, I want to be there.
It's great. It's called Professor Tom's if you're ever in New York. And they give a free Jell-O shooter whenever anyone dies. So the whole everybody in the bar, but it was great because I didn't tell them that I was coming. Paris and I just showed up there, and so we, you know, they had like 3 big screen TVs. It's like normally a sports bar. They get a lot of people in there to watch football games and basketball games and all that. So we're sitting in front of one of the big screen TVs, and we can sort of hear people whisper, "Is that him?" I said, "Yes, it is him."
Well, I mean,
finally someone came up and asked, so that was cool.
Another place that is, you know, loves you so dearly is Twitter. And I have been bombarded with questions for you from Twitter. And one that I really liked, and I think this person might be in the audience, Phoenix Torn, I think is in the audience. Hi. Thanks for your question. It's a very good one. Wanted to know, what surprised you the most watching season 1?
What surprised me the most?
Mm-hmm. Was there anything that surprised you?
Surprised me.
I heard you were surprised at actually the size of what the wall actually was in terms of its height, that you were happy that you had not given yourself any restraint because you didn't realize what 700 feet actually was.
Well, I that was not a surprise watching the show. That was a surprise visiting the set where they built the wall. You know, the Castle Black set is in Northern Ireland. It's in an old quarry, and they have built this castle beneath essentially a cliff that goes up, and they've painted, you know, the elevator is actually real. So they have the working elevator, and the area around the elevator, they just slap white paint on it to make it look like ice. The rest of the cliff is like black and brown and so forth.
TV magic.
And I'm standing in by the elevator there, and I'm looking down because it's actually sort of on the side of the hill where the cliff begins, and if you go down the hill, there's a big kind of lake where the quarry, the water has run down at the quarry, the actual bottom, and I'm looking down at the lake, and I'm looking at this big cliff, and I said, how far is it from the top of that cliff to like the bottom of the quarry where the lake is? And the guy said, well, 400 feet, you know. So I made the wall too big. Because that cliff looks awful big. And my wall would be like bigger. But you know, fantasy, I mean, that's the process of making fantasy is, you take something that's real, but fantasy is always bigger and brighter and more colorful than real life. I mean, The Wall was inspired by my visit in 1981 to Hadrian's Wall in England, which I recommend to any of you who haven't seen it. The wall built by the Emperor Hadrian to defend Roman colonies in the south of Britain from the wild people who lived to the north. And the first time I visited England was 1981, and I was driving around with my friend Lisa Tuttle, and we reached Hadrian's Wall just around sunset, and all the other tourist buses, it's a big tourist site, but all the tourist buses were leaving. So we got there just before the sun went down, and we climbed it. It was in the autumn, and we had it all to ourselves. So I'm standing on top of Hadrian's Wall by myself as the sun goes down, and the wind was rising, and it was very cold, and I had one of these magical moments where I was trying to, imagine I'm a Roman legionary, and I'm from Morocco or Mesopotamia or Sicily, and now I've been sent to this really cold, scary place, and I'm standing on this wall watching what might come out of those trees and those hills to the north at the end of the known world, and wondering what could be. And I said, this is a great feeling. I have to try to write about that and evoke it. Of course, the real Hadrian's Wall is only like 10 feet high, so it seems pretty cool when you're standing on top of it, but fantasy makes things bigger. And of course, the real Hadrian's Wall, what's likely to come out of those trees and so forth, are Scotsmen, which are pretty scary, but not as scary as
As
the
the
White
wildlings.
Walkers or
Yeah,
the others
yeah.
or the things that I invented. So you take the nugget, and you twist it.
Take us through that process for you adapting your own work.
Well, I mean, of course, one of the things that's different is at least the implied passage of time, which in the book is more explicit. I mean, ravens are very cool to bring messages, but they're not as fast as like telegraph lines or Twitter. They're not instantaneous. So we establish the events happening in King's Landing and Ned's downfall and imprisonment, and then Sansa being coerced into writing this letter. And then the next thing you know, Joffrey is getting the letter, where, of course, weeks have passed while the letter was dispatched by a raven, and the raven made its way north. It takes a while. And then the calling the banners, which, it goes from this scene to the banners are all there. And of course, it takes quite a while for the banners to assemble. They each have to get that raven, they get the message, they send out the word to their own villages and their sworn men and their feudal undermen, and they assemble as many men they can, and then they have to march great distances to Winterfell, where the army is assembling. And some of this is established fairly clearly in the books. I mean, the chapter of the assembly of the army is told from Bran's viewpoint, and he sees the Karstarks coming in, and the other people are there, and we get the introduction to many of the lords, while Bran just simply thinks about them. Well, these are the Karstarks, and they're from Karhold, and the Umbers are already here, and the Serwins were the first to arrive, or whatever he thinks about. And you get the introduction to these various families and feudal houses and what their heraldry is. A lot of exposition, but told hopefully in an interesting manner from and filtered through Bran's viewpoint. When I first wrote this adaptation, I actually changed it somewhat, and I wrote a whole scene where the banners fly off, as you see, and then you see men getting the banners. I didn't try to do all of the principal lords of the North, but I did some of the ones who I thought would be important characters, like you see Roose Bolton, his maester is delivering him a letter, and he's in the midst of flaying someone, but he breaks off to read the letter, and and you see the great John Umber getting the letter, and he's got his tankard of beer, and yes, it's war, let's get together and go off, and the Karstarks are marching out, and you see Mage Mormont's fleet is setting sail from Bear Island, and it was a montage. There was no dialogue in it. It was just visual images of the different places that we could. Montages were always my weakness when I was in Hollywood. I would commit montage at the drop of a hat. It was very sad. Maybe I just like that word montage.
It's a good one.
And of course, when I submitted that first draft, Dan and David read it, and David called me up and said, "George, this montage is fabulous, but it would realize it would cost 5 times our budget for the entire season to do it here. So we won't do it that way." All right, just have the ravens fly out.
People will get it.
That's the practicality of having to do these things. Frequently dictates. You have to eliminate sequences or combine characters or imply things rather than actually show things. I mean, I noticed also that first scene, the arrival of King Robert. The Cersei's wheelhouse that you see coming up again is a departure from the books. I mean, in the books, the wheelhouse is so big that it cannot fit inside Winterfell. The gateway is too large
so mad about
for it to get into the courtyard. It's like a giant medieval Winnebago with like 3 stories, and it takes like 40 horses to pull it down the road. Cersei is traveling in style. And it's great, but of course it would have cost us a small fortune to build a giant 3-story wheelhouse drawn by 40 horses or so. So they found this, gypsy thing or whatever that they have there, and it's pretty nice.
And are you okay with that, or does it break
okay.
your heart at all? How does that feel when you see those changes? And I can only imagine, thought about how that can't go through the gates of Winterfell, what that would actually be like, and then it ends up being a gypsy thing.
It feels okay because I understand the process and I understand why these choices are made. I think I was in a unique position coming to this whole thing because of the 10 years that I did spend in television and film. I was on the other side of this process. I know tomorrow we're doing the master class here at Tiff, where I'll be talking to some film students and so forth. And we'll be showing some of the older shows that I worked on and how to roll in. And I remember the very first thing of mine that was ever filmed was an episode of Twilight Zone, the CBS revival of Twilight Zone in the mid 80s, called The Last Defender of Camelot. And it was an adaptation of the classic Roger Zelazny short story, which I had done. And Roger Zelazny was one of my closest friends. He also lived in Santa Fe. I loved Roger. I loved his work. So when I got this assignment to adapt his story, which I had brought to their attention and said, this will make a great Twilight Zone episode, my idea was to do an absolutely faithful adaptation, to just take Roger's story and adapt it perfectly, because Hollywood was always messing up things, and I wasn't going to do that, especially not for my friend's story. And then, of course, I get into the process, and I find myself making these changes, some for good reasons, some for not so good reasons, and it was a very important educational experience for me. I'll give you 2 examples if we have the time to go into it. From that particular episode, I don't know if any of you have ever seen The Last Defender of Camelot or read the story. This is a story about Sir Lancelot, who is still alive. He has lived to the present day. And, he gets approached by Morgan Le Fay, who sends 2 thugs to assault him. And she's still alive, too. She's also lived to the present. And she says, Merlin is about to wake up. He's been asleep in a cave all these years. So Lancelot goes to see Merlin, and Merlin wakes up, and we realize that Merlin has this whole plan to restore Camelot. But Lancelot is trying to say, well, we don't really need a God-given king anymore. We have democracy now, and things have changed. They vote on their leaders. And well, we'll put an end to that, says Merlin. And so Lancelot winds up battling him. It's a great story. It's full of wonderful Roger Zelazny stuff. And at the end of it, there's a gigantic battle where Lancelot has to fight Merlin's enchanted champion, who's a magical suit of armor, the Hollow Knight. There's just the armor. There's no one inside the armor. And they fight in sort of an otherworldly Stonehenge. It looks like Stonehenge, but of course it's bigger, and there's a ethereal mist around it and all that. And they're on horses, and they're fighting and charging with swords and lances and stuff like that. And I wrote it all like that in the first draft. So And then we go into production, and the line producer comes to me and says, "Okay, George, you can have Stonehenge, or you can have horses, but you cannot have horses and Stonehenge." Because if we build Stonehenge, we're going to build it on the soundstage. It's going to be made of paper mache, and the horses galloping on the wooden floor of the soundstage will shake the giant rocks, and they'll fall over, and it won't look good at all.
No.
Or if you want the horses, then we'll film it on location, but we won't be able to build Stonehenge because the wind would just blow it over because they're just false fronts and all that. So you have to make your choice. And I was in agony over that. Oh God, they're going to ruin the story, you know. So I actually called up Roger and said, "Roger, I'm sorry, I apologize so much, but what they said, I could have horses, or I could have Stonehenge. What do you want?" It's Stonehenge. So, so we made our
Always choose
choice.
Stonehenge.
We had Stonehenge and no horses, and they had a sword fight on foot, and it worked fine. It was good. So that's the sort of example that I think is you can make in an adaptation. It's made for logical reasons having to do with budget and realities. However, there was also another change that occurred in that episode, which to this day I regret that I made. But I was brand new, and I didn't fight enough for it. The thing about working for the traditional networks is they got this idea in the head that every show has a formula, and high concept. And when you pitch the pilot, it has to fit it, Like my friend Mike Cassett came up with the classic formula years ago for the pitch of that. He's the Pope, she's a chimp, they fight crime. There it is, 3-word high concept for a TV show. The Pontiff and the Primate, coming soon to your network. So the network was always a little uneasy about Twilight Zone because it didn't have a little formula. It was an anthology show. Every episode was different from every other episode. But they managed to come up with one, nonetheless. The network came up with this. Oh, okay, we figured out what Twilight Zone is. Twilight Zone is an ordinary man finds himself in an extraordinary situation. So, okay.
All about the pitch.
That's great. So I pitch him The Last Defender of Camelot, and I write the script, and we're going into production, right? And suddenly, we're casting the role, and suddenly we get a panic call from the network. Wait, we can't go ahead with this episode. We've just realized there's no ordinary man in it. The main characters are Merlin, Lancelot, and Morgan Le Fay. Where's the ordinary man? I mean, Twilight Zone has to be about an ordinary man, and this is Lancelot. He's lived forever, He's not ordinary, he's a great hero. So, in the opening scene of the show, Lancelot is attacked by these two thugs because Morgan Le Fay wants to see him, and the idea is that she's hired the thugs. They're just street thugs. They're going to beat him up and take him to Morgan Le Fay, and she's going to tell him what's going on because they're ancient enemies. She didn't think, a polite message, Morgan Le Fay would like to see you, would work. So, that works perfectly fine in the story. So what I had to do was keep one of the thugs is like a young, innocent kid named Tom. And I had to keep Tom around for the rest of the whole goddamn story. So that there would be
your ordinary
an
man?
ordinary man who would be there. He doesn't do anything in the story. He just sort of tags around with Lancelot saying, "Gosh, wow, this is strange. My God, a wizard? Really?" But, and that's the kind of stuff that you hate to see in an adaptation because it's all wrong. It's for the wrong reasons. The network has this stupid idea about what the formula is, and they kind of impose it on you. And that's the sort of nonsense you get sometimes that, can mess up a show when they're trying to fit it into something. But the episode turned out all right, and Roger liked it, so.